Oh my God.
The sun was setting behind the mountains when the Mare first arrived at Blackwood Ranch. She came in the back of a wagon, her body pressed against wooden boards, her legs trembling from the long journey. The driver did not speak to her. He did not look at her. He just opened the gate and led her into the smallest pen at the far end of the property. Then he left without saying a single word. The Mare stood alone in the dirt. Her brown coat was covered in dust and sweat. Her mane was tangled with burrs and dried mud. But her eyes were still bright, still watching, still hoping for something better. She had been many places before this ranch. She had known many different hands, some gentle, some cruel, most just indifferent. This place looked no different from the others. Blackwood Ranch sat in a valley between two rocky hills. The land was dry and yellow. The grass grew thin and short. A wooden fence surrounded the property, old and cracked from years of desert wind. There were 6 barns scattered across the ranch, their roofs sagging in the middle. About 30 horses lived there. Most were work horses, strong animals used for pulling wagons and plowing fields. A few were riding horses kept for the ranch owner's business. The Mare could see them from her small pen. They looked tired, worn down, just like her. The ranch belonged to a man named Eli Blackwood. He was a tall man with gray hair and a permanent frown carved into his face. He ran the ranch like a machine. Every horse had a purpose. Every horse had to earn its keep. If a horse could not work, it did not stay. Simple as that. Eli did not believe in wasting food or space on animals that served no use. He had built his ranch on this belief, and he had never once questioned it. That first night, the Mare got no food, no water, no blanket to keep warm. She stood in the corner of her pen and listened to the sounds around her. Horses breathing in nearby stalls, wind rattling the barn doors. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled at the rising moon. The Mare closed her eyes but did not sleep. She had learned long ago not to expect comfort, not to expect kindness. She had learned to survive on very little. Morning came cold and gray. A young boy appeared at the fence. He was maybe 12 years old, thin and small for his age. His name was Tommy. He worked at the ranch doing odd jobs, cleaning stalls, carrying water, fixing broken fence posts. His father had died 2 years ago, and his mother worked in town as a seamstress. Tommy needed this job. He needed the few coins Eli paid him each week. Tommy stopped when he saw the Mare. He tilted his head and studied her carefully. Most people looked at her and saw a broken animal. They saw the scar on her front leg, where barbed wire had torn through muscle and skin. They saw her thin body and dull coat. They saw a horse with no future. But Tommy saw something else. He saw the way she held her head up despite everything. He saw the intelligence in her dark eyes. He saw a fighter. "Hey there," Tommy whispered softly. He reached through the fence with an apple he had saved from his breakfast. The Mare did not move at first. She watched him carefully, trying to decide if she could trust this small human. Finally, hunger won. She stepped forward slowly, favoring her injured leg, and took the apple from his hand. Her lips were gentle against his palm. Tommy smiled for the first time in days. "You are pretty, you know," he said quietly. Under all that dirt, the Mare chewed the apple slowly, savoring every bite. When she finished, she stepped closer to the fence. Tommy reached up and touched her forehead. The Mare closed her eyes and leaned into his hand. Something warm spread through her chest. Something she had almost forgotten. Hope. But hope was dangerous on Blackwood Ranch. Tommy learned this an hour later when Eli came storming across the yard. The ranch owner had seen the boy at the Mare's pen. He grabbed Tommy by the shoulder and pulled him away roughly. "Don't waste your time on that one," Eli said harshly. "She is lame. Cannot run. cannot work. I only took her because the previous owner paid me to. She will be here 1 month, maybe 2. Then she goes to the slaughterhouse. That is her fate. You understand?" Tommy's face went pale. "But sir, maybe she just needs rest. Maybe her leg could heal if—" "Her leg will never heal," Eli interrupted coldly. "I have seen 1,000 horses in my life, boy. I know the difference between one that can recover and one that cannot. This Mare is finished. Now get back to work. The stalls need cleaning." Tommy walked away slowly, his hands shaking. He looked back once at the Mare. She was watching him through the fence, her ears forward, her eyes following his every move. She did not understand the words the humans had spoken, but she understood the tone. She understood the way the tall man had pointed at her. She had heard that tone before, at other ranches, other places. It always meant the same thing. Her time was running out. That night, Tommy could not sleep. He lay in his small bed in the workers' cabin and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the Mare standing alone in that pen. He thought about her gentle eyes and the way she had taken the apple from his hand. He thought about what Eli had said. 1 month, maybe 2. Then the slaughterhouse. Tommy made a decision. He did not know how. He did not know if it was even possible. But he was going to save that Mare, somehow, someway, even if it cost him everything.
The next morning, Tommy woke up before sunrise. The sky was still dark, with only a thin line of orange light touching the horizon. He dressed quickly and ran across the cold ground to the mare's pen. His breath came out in white clouds. His fingers were numb from the freezing air. But he did not care. He had made a promise to himself, and he would keep it. The mare was standing in the same corner where he had left her. She lifted her head when she heard his footsteps. Her ears turned forward. Tommy climbed over the fence and walked slowly toward her. He carried a bucket of water and a handful of oats he had stolen from the main feed room. It was not much, but it was something. "Good morning, girl," Tommy whispered. He set the bucket down in front of her. The mare hesitated for just a moment, then lowered her head and drank deeply. The water was cold and fresh. She had not tasted anything so good in weeks. When she finished drinking, she ate the oats from Tommy's hand. Her soft nose brushed against his palm. Tommy felt his heart swell with emotion. He spent the next hour brushing the dirt and tangles from her coat. He worked slowly and carefully, talking to her the whole time. He told her about his father, who had loved horses more than anything in the world. He told her about his mother, who worked her fingers raw every night sewing clothes for rich families in town. He told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, where every animal would be treated with kindness and respect. The mare stood perfectly still while he worked. She seemed to understand that this boy was different, that he cared. When Tommy finally stepped back, the mare looked better. Her coat had begun to shine in places. Her mane fell smoothly across her neck. She was still thin, still scarred, but there was something new in her eyes, a small spark of life. "You are beautiful," Tommy said softly. "I'm going to call you Copper, because your coat looks like copper when the sun hits it just right." The mare, Copper, blinked slowly. Tommy smiled. For the first time since coming to Blackwood Ranch, he felt like he had a friend. But friendship was not enough to change reality. As the days passed, Tommy watched Eli carefully. The ranch owner never looked at Copper, never checked on her, never asked if she was being fed. To Eli, she was already gone, already dead, just a problem waiting to be solved. Tommy knew he needed a plan, something bigger than stolen oats and secret morning visits. He needed a miracle. 2 weeks after Copper arrived, a terrible storm hit the valley. The wind came howling down from the mountains like a wild animal. Rain fell in sheets, so thick you could barely see 5 feet in front of your face. Thunder shook the ground. Lightning split the sky in jagged white lines. All the ranch hands ran to secure the barns and bring the horses inside. But in the chaos and confusion, everyone forgot about Copper. She was still in her small outdoor pen, exposed to the full fury of the storm. Tommy realized it first. He was helping close the barn doors when he suddenly remembered. His stomach dropped. Without thinking, He ran out into the rain. The wind nearly knocked him over. Water poured down his face, blinding him. But he kept running toward Kappa's pen at the far end of the property. When he reached her, his heart broke. Kappa was pressed against the fence, her body shaking violently. The rain had turned the dirt into thick mud that came up to her ankles. She could barely stand. Her injured leg was trembling, unable to support her weight properly. Lightning flashed overhead, and Copper flinched with fear. "It is okay," Tommy shouted over the wind. "I am here. I will not leave you." He tried to open the gate, but the lock was rusted and stuck. He pulled with all his strength. Nothing. He kicked it. Still nothing. Panic rose in his chest. Copper was in danger. The storm was getting worse. He looked around desperately for something to help. Then he saw it, a heavy rock near the fence post. Tommy grabbed it and smashed it against the lock. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, the lock broke. Tommy threw open the gate and grabbed Kappa's lead rope. "Come on, girl. We have to move." But Kappa's legs would not cooperate. The mud was too deep. Her injured leg kept slipping. She stumbled and nearly fell. Tommy caught her, his small body trying to hold up her massive weight. "Please," he begged, tears mixing with rain on his face. "Please, Copper. You have to try. Just a little bit. Please." Copper looked down at the boy. This small human who had shown her kindness when no one else would. Who had given her a name. Who had stayed with her in the storm when everyone else had forgotten. Something stirred deep inside her. A memory of who she used to be. A memory of strength. She took one step forward. Then another. Her legs shook. Pain shot through her injured limb. But she kept moving. Tommy walked beside her, his hand on her neck, guiding her through the storm. Step by step, they made their way across the muddy ground toward the main barn. It took 20 minutes to travel what should have been a 2-minute walk. By the time they reached the barn, both Tommy and Copper were exhausted. The boy's arms ached from holding her steady. The mare's legs trembled so badly she could barely stand. But they had made it, together. Tommy led Copper into an empty stall at the back of the barn. He found old blankets and covered her shivering body. He brought fresh water and hay. He sat down in the corner and watched her, making sure she was safe. Copper lowered herself carefully to the ground and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt protected. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the barn, a boy and a horse had formed a bond that nothing could break. Morning came quiet and still. The storm had passed during the night, leaving puddles of water everywhere. The sky was clear and blue. Birds sang in the trees. Everything looked peaceful, but Tommy's heart was filled with fear. He had hidden Copper in the back stall of the main barn. Sooner or later, Eli would find her, and when he did, there would be trouble. Tommy was right. Around noon, Eli walked into the barn to check on the horses. He moved from stall to stall, counting heads and making sure everyone had survived the storm. Then he reached the back of the barn. He stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the stall that was supposed to be empty, stood the lame mare. Clean, dry, covered with blankets, fed and watered. Eli's face turned red with anger. "Who did this?" he shouted. His voice echoed through the barn like thunder. All the ranch hands stopped working and looked up. Tommy, who had been cleaning a stall nearby, felt his stomach twist into knots. He walked forward slowly, his legs shaking. "I did, sir," Tommy said quietly. His voice was barely above a whisper. Eli stared down at the boy. "You brought this worthless animal into my barn? You wasted blankets and feed on her? Do you know how much those supplies cost?" "She would have died in the storm, sir," Tommy said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I cannot just leave her out there." "That is exactly what you should have done." Eli roared. "This mare is not worth saving, boy. She is lame. She cannot work. She will never be useful again. I told you this already." The other ranch hands gathered around, watching the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable. Others just stared at the ground. No one dared to speak. Eli was the boss. What he said was law. Tommy felt tears building behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "She's still alive, sir. She still has value. Just because she cannot work does not mean she should die." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Value? You want to talk about value? Let me tell you something about value, boy. A horse has value when it can plow a field, when it can pull a wagon, when it can carry a rider. This mare can do none of those things. She eats food that could go to useful animals. She takes up space that could house a working horse. That is not value. That is waste. But, sir, enough. Eli's voice cracked like a whip. Get this animal out of my barn. Put her back in that pen. And you, boy, if I catch you stealing feed or supplies again, you will lose your job. Your mother needs your wages. Think about that before you play hero again. Tommy's face went pale. He could not lose this job. His mother depended on the money he brought home. Without it, they would not be able to pay for food or rent. He stood frozen, torn between his promise to Copper and his duty to his family. Eli turned to one of the ranch hands. Marcus, remove this horse. Now, Marcus was a large man with rough hands and a weathered face. He had worked at Blackwood Ranch for 15 years. He never questioned orders. He walked toward Coppa's stall, rope in hand. Tommy's heart was breaking. He wanted to scream, to fight, to do something, but he was just a boy. What could he do against grown men? Marcus opened the stall door and reached for Coppa's halter. But something unexpected happened. Copper, who had been so gentle and quiet all this time, suddenly backed away. She pinned her ears flat against her head. Her eyes went wide. She had been moved from place to place her whole life, always forced to go where she did not want to go, always powerless. But something was different now. She had tasted kindness. She had felt safety, and she did not want to lose it. Marcus stepped forward again. Copper turned her body sideways, blocking him. She was not aggressive. She was not trying to hurt anyone. She was simply refusing to cooperate. Marcus grabbed the rope and tried to pull her forward. Copper planted her feet and would not budge. Even with her injured leg, she held her ground. Stubborn animal, Marcus muttered. He pulled harder. Copper pulled back. The two of them stood locked in a silent battle of wills. Eli watched with growing frustration. Just drag her out if you have to. But before Marcus could try again, something else happened. One of the other horses in the barn began to whinny. Then another, and another. Soon, all the horses were making noise, shifting in their stalls, stamping their feet. It was as if they sensed what was happening, as if they understood that one of their own was fighting for her life. An old ranch hand named Samuel, who rarely spoke, suddenly cleared his throat. "Boss," he said carefully, "maybe the mare could stay in the barn, just until the weather clears up proper. Ground outside is still muddy from the storm." Eli turned sharply to look at Samuel. "Are you questioning my orders?" Samuel lowered his eyes. "No, sir. Just thinking about the condition of that pen. Might not be safe right now. That is all." There was a long, tense silence. Eli looked at Samuel, then at Copper, then at all the horses making noise in their stalls. Finally, he let out a long, frustrated breath. "Fine," he said coldly. "She can stay in the barn until tomorrow. But tomorrow morning, she goes back outside. And next week, she goes to auction. If no one buys her, she goes to the slaughterhouse. That is final. No more delays. No more exceptions." Eli turned and walked out of the barn, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The ranch hands slowly returned to their work. Tommy stood there, his whole body shaking. He had bought Copper one more day, maybe two, but the clock was still ticking. The auction was coming, and unless something miraculous happened, Copper would be gone forever. Tommy walked into Coppa's stall and wrapped his arms around her neck. The mare lowered her head and rested it against the boy's shoulder. They stood there together in the quiet barn, both knowing that their time was running out. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. And sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive. The next week passed like a nightmare for Tommy. Every morning, he woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest. Every night, he went to bed knowing that time was running out. The auction was scheduled for Saturday. Today was Wednesday. 3 more days. That was all Copper had left. Tommy tried everything he could think of. He asked every person he knew if they would buy Copper. He spoke to farmers in town. He talked to travelers passing through. He even approached the church pastor, hoping maybe someone in the congregation would help. But the answer was always the same. No one wanted a lame horse. No one wanted to spend money on an animal that could not work. Tommy's mother saw the sadness in her son's eyes. One evening after dinner, she sat down beside him and took his hand. "Tommy," she said gently, "I know you love that horse, but sometimes we cannot save everyone. Sometimes we have to accept what we cannot change. Tommy looked at his mother with tears in his eyes. But it's not fair, Mama. Copper is good. She is kind. She deserves to live. His mother pulled him close and held him. I know, baby. I know. Life is not always fair. But you gave her kindness when no one else did. You gave her love. That matters. That will always matter. But Tommy was not ready to give up. Not yet. On Thursday morning, he came up with a new plan. It was desperate, maybe even foolish, but it was the only thing he could think of. He would try to heal Kappa's leg. If he could prove to Eli that she could recover, maybe the ranch owner would change his mind. Maybe he would give her a chance. Tommy spent every free moment working with Copper. He massaged her injured leg with warm water and cloths. He wrapped it carefully with clean bandages. He walked her slowly around the barn, encouraging her to put weight on the leg little by little. Copper seemed to understand what he was trying to do. She tried her best, even when the pain was obvious. She trusted this boy completely. By Friday afternoon, there was a small improvement. Kappa's limp was slightly less severe. She could walk a bit faster. Tommy's heart soared with hope. He ran to find Eli, who was working in his office inside the main house. Sir, Tommy said breathlessly, please, you have to come see Copper. Her leg is getting better. I have been working with her all week, and she is improving. If you just give her more time. Eli did not even look up from his papers. The auction is tomorrow, boy. Nothing has changed. But, sir, she is walking better. Come see for yourself. Eli finally raised his eyes. His expression was tired and cold. Listen to me carefully, Tommy. I have run this ranch for 23 years. I have seen hundreds of horses. I know what recovery looks like, and I know what false hope looks like. That mare's leg will never be strong enough for real work. Even if she improves a little, she will always be limited, always weak. I cannot afford to keep animals out of sentiment. But what if someone at the auction wants her? Tommy asked desperately. What if someone sees value in her? Eli shook his head. No one will bid on a lame horse, boy. She will go straight to the slaughterhouse. That is her fate. Now go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Tommy walked out of the office feeling crushed. He went back to the barn and sat in Kappa's stall. The mare nuzzled his hair gently. Tommy buried his face in her neck and cried. All his efforts had meant nothing. All his hope had been for nothing. I am sorry, he whispered to her. I tried. I really tried. Copper stood quietly beside him. She did not understand all the human words, but she understood sadness. She understood fear, and she understood love. This boy had shown her more love in 1 week than she had known in her entire life. That night, Tommy barely slept. He tossed and turned in his bed, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. He imagined the auction, the cold faces of buyers looking at Copper and seeing only worthlessness. The slaughterhouse man standing in the back, waiting to take her away. The thought made him physically sick. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. The sky was gray and cloudy. A cold wind blew across the ranch. Tommy got dressed slowly, his hands shaking. He walked to the barn where the auction would be held. Ranch hands were already setting up wooden benches for the buyers. A small platform had been built in the center where the horses would stand. People started arriving around 9 o'clock. Farmers and ranchers from all over the valley. Horse traders in dusty coats. Rich men from town looking for riding horses. They filled the benches, talking loudly and drinking coffee. The air smelled of leather, tobacco, and hay. Tommy stood near the barn door, watching everyone with growing dread. Eli walked to the front of the barn and raised his hand for silence. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. We have 15 horses to sell today. Strong animals. Good workers. Let's begin. One by one, the horses were brought out. A young black stallion went first. He sold quickly for a good price. Then a pair of work horses. Then a beautiful gray mare. Each time the auctioneer's hammer fell, Tommy's stomach tightened. Each sale brought them closer to Kappa's turn. Finally, after an hour, Tommy heard the words he had been dreading. Next we have lot number 13, the auctioneer announced. A mare, approximately 8 years old. Brown coat. Previously a racing horse. 2 ranch hands led Copper onto the platform. She walked slowly, her limp clearly visible to everyone. Tommy heard people whispering, heard them laughing quietly, heard them making jokes about the broken horse. His hands clenched into fists. He wanted to scream at them, to defend her, but his voice was trapped in his throat. Copper stood in the center of the platform, her head slightly lowered. The bright lights made her squint. All these strange faces staring at her. All these voices judging her. She shifted her weight uncomfortably, trying to ease the pain in her leg. The auctioneer cleared his throat awkwardly. As you can see, this mare has an old injury, but she has good bloodlines. Might be useful for breeding purposes perhaps. Let us start the bidding at $10. Silence. Complete and total silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Tommy felt tears burning his eyes. This was it. This was the moment when the world would decide that copper was worth nothing. $10? The auctioneer repeated, his voice uncertain. Anyone? How about $5? Still nothing. People looked away, shifted in their seats, whispered to their neighbors. In the back corner, Tommy saw the slaughterhouse man lean forward slightly. A cruel smile touched his lips. He was waiting for the price to drop low enough that taking her would be profitable. The auctioneer looked uncomfortable now, going once for $5. Tommy felt his whole world collapsing. This could not be happening. Not to Copper. Not to the horse who had fought so hard to survive. Not to his friend. Going twice. And then something extraordinary happened. The auctioneer's hand lifted, ready to bring the hammer down. Ready to seal Coppa's fate. The slaughterhouse man in the back corner reached into his pocket, preparing to make his offer. Tommy felt his legs go weak. This was the end. There was nothing more he could do. But then, in that moment of absolute silence, something changed. Copper turned around, not toward the exit, not toward the ranch hands holding her rope. She turned slowly and looked directly at the crowd. Her dark eyes moved across every face in that barn, one by one, person by person. She did not look away. She did not lower her head. She stood there with a dignity that made the air feel heavy. The room fell deathly silent. People who had been whispering stopped mid-sentence. People who had been looking away found themselves unable to turn their heads. There was something in the mare's eyes, something powerful, something that reached into the chest of every person there and squeezed their heart. This was not a broken animal begging for mercy. This was a survivor demanding to be seen, to be recognized, to be remembered for who she was, not just what she could no longer do. She had been fast once. She had been strong. She had raced across open plains with the wind in her mane. She had known freedom and joy. And even though her body was scarred and her leg was damaged, her spirit was still whole, still unbroken. An old farmer in the front row lowered his head. His wife beside him brought her hand to her mouth. A young rancher stared at Copper with wide eyes, as if seeing a horse for the first time in his life. Even the slaughterhouse man in the back corner shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet the mare's steady gaze. Tommy watched all of this happen and felt something crack open inside his chest. Copper was not just standing there. She was speaking without words. She was telling her story, and for the first time, people were listening. The silence stretched on. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The auctioneer opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He had conducted hundreds of auctions in his life. He had seen every kind of horse, but he had never seen anything like this. Then, from the middle of the crowd, an old man stood up. His name was Samuel. Not the ranch hand Samuel, but old Samuel from the hills. He lived alone in a small cabin 20 miles outside of town. People said he had been a great horseman in his younger days, but he had lost everything in a fire years ago and had lived in poverty ever since. He walked with a cane. His clothes were patched and worn. Everyone knew he barely had enough money to feed himself. Old Samuel took 3 slow steps forward. The wooden floor creaked under his weight. Every eye in the barn turned to look at him. He stopped at the edge of the platform and stared up at Copper. The mare looked back at him. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other. 2 old souls recognizing something familiar in one another. $50, old Samuel said. His voice was rough but clear. The room erupted in shocked whispers. $50? For a lame horse? Was the old man crazy? Did he not see that she was worthless? But old Samuel did not care what anyone thought. He had looked into Kappa's eyes and seen courage. Real courage. The kind that does not come from never falling down, but from getting back up every single time. He knew that kind of courage. He had lived it. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. Did you say $50, sir? I did, old Samuel confirmed. Before the auctioneer could respond, another voice rang out. $60. It was the farmer's wife from the front row. Her husband looked at her in shock, but she ignored him. She was staring at Copper with tears in her eyes. Then another voice. $70. A young rancher stood up. 80, someone else called out. 90, 100. The barn exploded with noise. Hands shot up everywhere. People were shouting numbers over each other. The auctioneer could barely keep track. The bidding climbed higher and higher. 110, 120, 130. Tommy stood frozen, unable to believe what he was seeing. These are the same people who had laughed at Copper just minutes ago. The same people who had looked away in disgust. But something had shifted. Something fundamental had changed when Copper turned around and showed them her truth. The bidding finally slowed at $140. Old Samuel's voice cut through the noise one last time. $150. He said it with finality, with determination. This was everything he had. Every coin he had saved. Every dollar he could spare. But it did not matter. Some things were worth more than money. The auctioneer looked around the room. $150. Going once, going twice. He paused, giving people one last chance. But no one else spoke. The hammer fell with a sharp crack. Sold. To the gentleman in the back for $150. The barn erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, some even cheering. Tommy felt tears streaming down his face, but this time they were tears of joy, relief, gratitude. Copper was saved. She was actually saved. Old Samuel walked slowly to the platform. The ranch hands handed him Coppa's lead rope. He took it gently and looked into the mare's eyes again. You and me, he said softly. We're going to be just fine. Tommy ran forward, unable to stop himself. Sir, please. Can I visit her? Can I come see her sometimes? Old Samuel looked down at the boy. He saw the love shining in Tommy's eyes. He saw the bond between this child and this horse. He smiled, and his whole weathered face softened. Boy, you can visit her whenever you want. In fact, I could use help taking care of her. My cabin is not fancy, but there is green grass and a warm shelter. She will have everything she needs, and you are welcome anytime. Tommy's heart nearly burst with happiness. He turned to Copper and wrapped his arms around her neck. The mare lowered her head and rested it on the boy's shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment while people filed out of the barn, still talking in amazed voices about what they had just witnessed. Eli stood near the door, watching everything with an unreadable expression. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or maybe just surprise. But it passed quickly, and he turned away. Old Samuel led Copper out of the barn and into the sunlight. Tommy walked beside them, his hand resting on Coppa's neck. The mare moved slowly, her limp still visible, but her head was held high. She had survived. Against all odds, against all expectations, she had survived. As they walked toward old Samuel's wagon, Copper turned her head one last time to look back at Blackwood Ranch, at the place that had almost been her end. Then she turned forward again toward her new life, toward green pastures and gentle hands, toward a place where she would be valued not for what she could do, but for what she was. A survivor, a fighter, a legend, and she would never be forgotten again.